and Councillor Rhodes from Wakefield have sent apologies. I wonder if the committee could introduce themselves, please. So, Councillor Hutchinson.
Councillor Colin Hutchinson from Calderdale.
Thank you. Councillor Blackborough.
Yeah, Councillor Blackborough, I'm the Chair of the Adults Health and Social Care Scrutiny Board in Calderdale.
Councillor Scopes.
I am Councillor Andrew Scopes from Leeds and the Chair of the Health Scrutiny Board in Leeds. Thank you.
Councillor Andy Nichols.
Yeah, Councillor Andy Nichols, Wakefield Council Deputy Chair of Adults, Health and Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee.
And Councillor Andy Soloway.
Yeah, Councillor Andy Soloway from North Yorkshire Council.
Thank you. Councillor Jamil, we are expecting from Bradford, and I'm Councillor Smage from Kirklees Council. Hope I've got everybody. Councillor Jamil is here now. So,
oh yeah,
okay. Okay. Welcome, Councillor Jamil. Right, so minutes of the previous meeting. Are there any points anybody wishes to raise on the minutes of the previous meeting? Councillor Hutchinson.
Yes, I know a letter was sent to the Chief Coroner from the committee, as we discussed at the last meeting in December, and it requested an acknowledgement, but at least I was wondering whether we had received anything back from the Chief Coroner.
As I understand it, we haven't received anything at this moment in time. Does the committee wish us to send a communication to the Chief Coroner and ask if it's possible to receive a reply?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, okay, all right. We can do that then. Yes, we'll make some inquiries about that. Okay. Are there any other points on the minutes of the meeting? Colin?
The NHS England operational documents for 2025-2026 were issued just after Christmas. And they reduced the number of national priorities, and measures to promote annual health checks for people with mental health problems, learning disability and autism are no longer a national priority in the operational planning.
Yeah.
I was wondering what West Yorkshire Integrated Care Board is doing to ensure that that important work continues to be developed.
Ian, can you answer that?
Yes, so the council is right. So I think as part of the national planning guidance, the number of national targets has been reduced roughly by half. And this is to try and create a bit more space and flexibility for ICPs and local organisations to respond to local needs, rather than have a kind of a sort of a fairly heavy kind of planning assessment and then performance assessment process. You know, the issue that the councillor raises around health checks for you know, people with mental health and learning disabilities is a really important one, and our expectation at this point is that will continue. We can put something in writing to that effect. I think actually, Councillor Hutchinson, we talked about bringing planning, the 25-26 operational plan back to the next meeting, so it might be that we can cover it off in that conversation.
Thanks.
Yeah, that would be good. Thanks, Ian. Okay. Are there any other points on the minutes? No? Can we agree those as a true record then, please? Can members of the committee indicate? Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Right, so we move to item 5 then, and this is an update. Oh no, sorry, minutes of the previous meeting, I've forgotten. Declarations of interest. Does anybody have any declarations of interest they wish to make at this point in time? No, I'm not seeing any. If there's any throughout the meeting, please complete the relevant form. Item 4, we don't have any public deputations or petitions that have been notified to us. So item 5 then now, the Yorkshire Ambulance Service NHS Trust. The paper is here for information, but I think we have some officers from the ambulance service who will go through this with us. So Nick, I think you and your colleagues are going to lead on this item. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. Well, first of all, thank you all for the opportunity for Yorkshire Ambulance Service to come and present and have a conversation around the service that we provide for our patients within West Yorkshire. My name's Nick Smith. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Yorkshire. I've been in the ambulance service for many years, 30 plus. So I have hopefully a good understanding of how the service operates going forward. Can I just introduce some of my colleagues who will be there to answer some of the questions as we go through. Introduce first of all is Rachel Gillett, who's the Director of Partnerships and Operations within West Yorkshire. I've got Julia Nixon, who's our Associate Co, who's responsible for remote care. Now, remote care means our 999 contact centre and our 111 contact centre as well. And then Chris Dexter. Chris is the Managing Director for Patient Transport Service, the planned care aspect of Trust. So I will take the paper as read, and obviously I assume there'll be lots of questions that will come through that, which we'll be more than happy to answer. If it's okay, I'd probably like to take a few minutes maybe just to explain a little bit around context, how the ambulance service operates in 2025, which is very different to how it operated maybe 20, 30 years ago, as we've seen a lot more demand increase on the ambulance service. So if I take the 999 service, and I apologise if this is already known, but I think it helps how we set some of the questions for later. When we receive a 999 call from a member of the public, the call is answered by a call taker, a non-clinical call taker. We refer to these as EMDs, emergency medical dispatchers. And they ask a set number of questions, an algorithm, which is a internationally recognised set of questions. And from there, depending on what the answers are given by the caller, then we identify a category. And I'm sure people are probably familiar with the category of calls that the ambulance service operates to. There's 5. There's category 1, which is immediately life-threatening. That's for patients in cardiac arrest who's got severe respiratory distress. That requires any available ambulance to be sent to that call. We will divert from any other call to attend a category 1. Then we have category 2. They're for patients who are what we class as emergency calls, and these are for patients who are having chest pains, who have stroke symptoms, who have difficulty breathing, and patients who need an immediate response, but not necessarily immediately life-threatening. And then the third, we have category 3, which is more straightforward emergencies, such as people falling, fractures, things like that, and people who it's not actually essential to get there within minutes, but obviously these patients need a response of some form in order to get the right appropriate treatment within there. So the way that when the calls are categorised within our contact centre, we then identify some calls are immediately dispatched. Category 1s, we don't wait, we immediately dispatch the nearest available ambulance. We also do that for some category 2 calls, but category 2, category 3 and category 5 calls, and 4 and 5 calls, they are assessed by a clinician. Now this is very different to how the ambulance service operated probably 15 years ago. Where now we have many experienced paramedics, nurses, and even GPs working in our contact centres who then assess a call and identify what is the most appropriate treatment or referral for that patient, what does that patient actually need. And a lot of patients don't need an ambulance to be sent. There's alternatives. We can very quickly identify patients who would be more suitable being sent to respond in the community, urgent community response teams, primary care, and even giving some advice. So that's the primary use within EOC of our clinicians. And we currently do about 15 to 18% of these patients who are able to be treated and get the support that they need without having to send an ambulance. Category 5 calls, which are the patients who are really identified as just needing, probably don't need a response at all, they go to our 111 service and they are assessed through 111. So those patients who actually do need an ambulance, then we have a team of dispatchers, and what they do, they identify the nearest appropriate resource to send to the patient. Unfortunately, these days, when I started, it would be an ambulance. We sat on an ambulance station waiting, a local ambulance station, waiting for a call to come through, and we would ring the station. The ambulance crew would then respond. That's not like that, unfortunately. How we are now, we more often than not we have calls waiting. We have a stack of calls waiting to be dispatched in priority order. So when a crew becomes available, either at the beginning of the shift or when they become clear at hospital, then that's usually when they're allocated a detail. So usually the ambulance will be responding from a hospital rather than a local ambulance station, and that has a big impact on our infrastructure that we currently have, and now we want to move forward in the future, and I'm sure we'll come on to that about ambulance stations. So once a crew get on scene of a patient, again, they've got alternatives. Historically, we would have conveyed every patient to an ED department. We don't do that anymore. Our crews have alternatives. We provide pathways, advice, contact centres, links with the local community schemes, agreed pathways that allows the patient again to get the most appropriate treatment rather than going to an ED department. And when you add up the ear and treat, you'll see, and the amount of patients don't need to be conveyed, when our crew has actually done a face-to-face assessment, in West Yorkshire, just over half of patients are conveyed to ED departments. So we do a lot of work, if you like, behind the scenes to reduce the pressure in the system and utilise what alternatives are. When the crew arrive at hospital, which that can be an SDEC, same day emergency centre. That can be. There can be other alternatives directly to the wards. Well, majority of patients do go to ED department. On arrival at ED department, we do a clinical handover, and then when that patient's handed over, then our crew are available then to get the vehicle ready, cleared, ready for the next available call. Then become available, and they are more than likely allocated another incident. So that's probably gives a good overview of the way that the 999 system operates, and might help some of the questions later on. As for the paper, could I just refer to a couple of sections I just want to refer to before we go to questions, maybe just to emphasise as well. I'd like to bring attention to section 2.2 within there, where it outlines the response expectations of each category. And again, people may be aware of this already, but every category has a specific response time standard. For category 1s, it's an average of 8-minute response time with another 90th percentile. But generally, we focus on the average. For category 2, the standard is 18 minutes. However, for the last 2 years, it has been 30 minutes in order as an interim standard. And within Yorkshire, we're currently at 33 minutes year to date, and West Yorkshire with 31.5 minutes within there. That type of performance is probably typical across all ambulance services, and we've seen more increase in pressure. Section 4, I know Rachel will come on to this and explain this, but we're really proud of our partnership working across Yorkshire and in particular West Yorkshire. We have great relationships with the acute providers. We meet with the ICB on a monthly basis, and we really have some really good examples of how we work together to improve, to put options in there for patients, and provide the best possible care that we can do. 5.2 around our ambulance stations. I briefly mentioned this, but our model has had to change as demand has increased. It's very, very rare to have an ambulance on an ambulance station waiting. If we do have a spare ambulance, it will be allocated to a strategic location, probably a roadside standby. You may see ambulances parked at Starbucks and McDonald's and places. That's not because having a break, it's because that is where we've identified the most appropriate location for the next call to come through. What that means is then the estate that we have got was more of it's from 1974, 1960s, and it just doesn't reflect the state that we'd need for a modern ambulance service. And that's why what we're wanting to our aspirations are to look at larger and more combined services, stations, where we can add more facilities for staff support, training, fleet maintenance, and going forward. But the problem with that is capital, access to capital as an ambulance service to do that. But that's our aspiration across Yorkshire. We've done this in some. Doncaster has been successful. We've just agreed to just plan permission in Hull, and we will look to do the same. But our next priority is going to be Wakefield area, but that's depending very much on funding and access to capital for that. Section 6, Julie will mention more of this around remote care. Our focus on investment is very much in pre-dispatch. It's in our contact centres and increasing the number of clinicians that we have available in order to make sure the patient gets what they need at the early stage. Sending an ambulance has to be like the last resort that we do. We want to make sure the patients get what they need early. 6.1, the role of 111. And we're really proud. We've done a lot of work to try and integrate our 111 and 999 systems as much as we possibly can. And Julia will be happy to answer questions on that. We're investing in what we call NHS pathways, which means that whether a patient rings 111 or 999, they will be taken through the same algorithms, the same questions in order to identify what their particular needs are. That allows us to have better access to other alternative services across Yorkshire as well. Just on 111, it's in there. I just want to pick out on the 28th of December, we dealt with nearly 10,000 111 calls, and I don't think it's sometimes recognised the amount of the use that 111 gets, and from there we can ensure that patients are directed to the most appropriate when those alternatives are available. And also it does help us identify some of the patients that we assess through 111 are identified as needing an emergency ambulance, which may have resulted previously would probably waited waited a long time for an ambulance to be sent, whereas 111 can very immediately, automatically send an ambulance to a patient who needs that. And then finally, I just want to pick out number 7, and I know this is later on the agenda as well. Chris, again, will be happy to take questions around this on our patient transport service. There's some examples of where PTS adds tremendous value to our patients, and the example there giving us around end of life, and now we're able to just make our most vulnerable patients have the best possible care that they can do and play our role within that with our partners. And then the section 7.4
comments about like different level of provision compared to, sounds like when you worked a while ago and you're waiting for calls to come in. I think you're referring that to a while ago. I guess the question I have, I get when I have seen this in the news, sort of the ambulance issue, some of it has been around sort of not being able to vacate your ambulance, so you know, the queuing outside hospitals, that sort of thing. I just wanted an update on that aspect of provision, and I guess I'm Leeds, so I guess I'm biased in that sense, but I guess it's the system flow stuff that it feels like it's really important to keep the NHS going for everyone involved. So just appreciate your view on that. Thank you.
Rachel, I'll ask you to give the West Yorkshire perspective in a second. If I just give more of a national view on that, it is a real challenge for every ambulance service. Well, the vast majority of ambulance services in the country, and probably when you look at Yorkshire, we probably are in the middle around where the challenges are. We do have variation from each of the ICB areas, with significant pressures in number in North Yorkshire has been a real challenge, South Yorkshire, and then West Yorkshire probably less so than the other two areas. But Rachel, can I pass on to you to maybe give a view from a West Yorkshire perspective around hospital handovers?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And yes, thank you, Councillor Scopes, for raising that. Yeah, so in many respects, it's quite a good news story in West Yorkshire in terms of our handover position. So we generally do have, we have an exceptionally good relationship with our acute providers, and what they have also done and taken a stance on is recognising that there's a risk to patients in the community if we don't and aren't able to kind of release our crews from the hospital site kind of to respond. So I am kind of delighted to say that actually they take a really positive response to trying to kind of take the patients, do that clinical handover, and then free our crews up to enable them to complete paperwork, do their wrap up, to get them back on the road really quickly. So I think our current year to date average handover across West Yorkshire combined is just over 22 minutes. Now the national standard is 15, and we have a complete turnaround time standard of 30 minutes. So again, as you can imagine, there's already a kind of compromise. So what we aim to do between ourselves and the acute hospitals is get our crews turned around within a complete cycle of 30 minutes. So that is the first part of that is the crews handing the patient over to the hospital so that the clinical care can be continued by themselves. We have a standard of 15 minutes for that. And then we have a standard of 15 minutes for the crews then to kind of prepare themselves, prepare the vehicle, stock up, clean the vehicle down, complete their paperwork so that we've got a complete kind of patient record and make themselves available. And again, another 15 minutes for that. Now, overall, we're about an average of 48 minutes for our turnaround. So again, we've still got some kind of improvements to kind of work on there, but we've already established a very strong relationship with the providers to kind of support us on that. And we're also put a number of quality improvement initiatives in to improve the second part of that, which is the crew clear and working with our staff to understand what some of the barriers are, some of the complications that they encounter in doing that second part of the process. So all told, it's the position in West Yorkshire is not as bad as it is elsewhere, but equally we know that we've still got some improvement, and that's it's been a constant focus and will continue to be a focus moving into the next financial year as well.
Thank you through the chair. Just in terms of a follow-up, I just think that's really helpful to know. It's interesting. I imagine there's two things. One, I imagine that the average probably means there's some that are really quick and some that are probably much too long. Yeah. I guess it's something around making sure you keep your focus on that, and if there's anything we can do in terms of where we can put pressure on hospitals in terms of specifics, in terms of focus, I'll be really interested in that. So that's my first question. And I guess the second question is around that second period. So the first bit, we're at an average 7 minutes behind, but if we're meant to do 15 and we do 22, and the second bit, again, it sounds like it's meant to be in 15 minutes, but it looks like we are 26 minutes, so that would make us 11 minutes behind. And so that's interesting, and I wonder if there's anything we can do in terms of streamlining either the paperwork or the cleaning process. The other thing you mentioned, obviously I don't know this process and I'm a lay person on this. I've been fortunate enough not to be in an ambulance, so please accept my question in a way it's meant, which is a genuine one. So those were my two questions. Thank you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. As I mentioned, the quality improvement initiatives is very much focused on that crew clear element and the exact things that you've just said. So we are looking at kind of streamlining kind of how much information that our crews need to collect on the paperwork and making sure that that's an efficient process and that there are no glitches in that. Some of the very practical issues that we've experienced has been connectivity. So obviously our crews are remote, and sometimes we have difficulties connecting to Wi-Fi or having a strong enough signal for the devices to remain fully functional. We have put in a Wi-Fi improvement process. So again, some of that's been done jointly with our hospitals, some of that's been kind of sort of independently and separate. So depending on what the solution's been needed, we've either been able to improve the connectivity so that our devices can connect to the hospital's kind of Wi-Fi, and where that's not been possible, we've been able to kind of put in local solutions. So we're hopeful that that problem will be minimised as a result of that work. Obviously, having a patient record is really important. So again, we have to be quite careful about over streamlining that. So we need to make sure that what information we are collecting is necessary and essential for that patient journey, and also kind of then being able to transfer that information through to the hospitals as well, so that they've got a complete record of the care that the patients encountered as part of their interaction with ourselves. So yeah, and thank you for the offer of any improvements. If there's anything else that we come across where we think that we'd be able to kind of get some support from yourselves, we'll definitely take you up on that offer. Thank you.
Could I just add something else?
Yes,
to that?
yeah.
The 15-minute is quite an historic standard for Crew Clear, and that was prior to about 7 years ago introduced the electronic patient report form, which was one of the first in the country to do that. Prior to that, the record was done by paper. People just write that in the ambulance en route. Obviously, that's not possible now with technology, with the laptops that's been taken. So that has had an impact on our Crew Clear time as well. But as Rachel said, the quality that gives us the information that adds to that is really, really beneficial.
I mean, it should be. It really should be. So I can just hotspot on my phone anywhere I like and go on my council laptop, log in on the train on my phone. And obviously you don't want your staff to have to use their phone. But if you're talking about a Wi-Fi box with like 15 gig a month, you're talking like 20 quid a month contract. It's not, and I get it's not that straightforward, but the data thing I think is really, really weak. And I don't mean that harshly. I mean, it needs to be sorted so you have data everywhere. I just don't think that's a good enough position. So I just challenge you, push you back on that and say, look, there must be a way to get data in your ambulances. That's a comment, not a question. But thank you for that. I really appreciate what you're doing.
Okay, thank you. And also as well, do you have to have a closed Wi-Fi system, or can you link to any other health Wi-Fi or local authority Wi-Fi system that is in the area if you're not using portable Wi-Fi as suggested by Councillor Scopes, or do you have to have it in a secure environment?
We have it's a secure environment, but we have every one of our devices has its own contact from a SIM to be able to do that. And then, but when we're at hospitals and we connect to the local, I think it's G-Rove. I forget the.
Oh, I don't know. You're too technical there for
I know,
me
but there's network that we
isn't it?
connect to there, and that's sometimes where the difficulty's been, because the Wi-Fi's probably been set up by the hospital for the internal bit and not as for the external part of it as well. But it's a fair challenge around, and we are doing it. I mean, as Rachel mentioned, going around all the 15 ED departments to try and work through how we can work with each estates department in order to improve the access to Wi-Fi when we actually get there.
Yeah, indeed. Councillor Hutchinson.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions, if I may. Following up on Councillor Scope's point, congratulations on all the hard work that you and your staff have been doing to achieve the results you have done over this winter, when a number of other services have run into serious problems. But measuring the targets and the performance in terms of averages does obscure a lot of the actual experience that patients receive and that your teams are having to deal with. I was wondering whether there was any possibility of expressing the performance in other terms so that we can see the range of responses, whether in quartiles or quintiles, which would give a lot more, I think, a lot more accurate picture of what you're having to deal with. And that obviously it does vary from acute trust to acute trust as to what, particularly the handover times, and whether there's any advantage in actually giving a more granular picture.
I'll pick that up, but I want to, if I pass on to Julia in a moment, maybe to explain what we do around the long waits, Julia, and the work that we do around that. I'll give a very simplified picture of the measures around the average. We do percentiles. We do measure the 90th percentile, and we have from a safety perspective, anything that's twice over the 90th percentile is identified as additional risk there for a patient, and that's the work that we do around really focusing on that group, of that cohort of patients, because they're the patients who obviously are waiting longer than elsewhere, and look at alternatives. And Julie, I'll bring you in just to explain the work around that in a second. As an ambulance service as well, we're very data rich. We measure. We've got lots and lots of measures of different areas. But it's easy to get, as you mentioned there, it's easy to get lost in numbers and percentages when it is actually the experience of what our patients are seeing, and it's that 10% that is the critical part of the patient. That's what we've been measuring around the impact, because along, I mean, there's a necessarily negative impact on a patient. There's on experience, but necessarily from a clinical perspective, and that's why that's cohort of patients are our focus, to make sure that we have provided the safest service that we can. Julie, can I bring you in just to add to that?
Yes, of course you can. So, morning everyone, I'm Julie Nixon. I joined Jazz just over a year ago, and looking after the remote patient care kind of strategic intent and the service lines underneath that. Over the last 6 months, we've done a bit of a deep dive into excessive delays. I think as Nick says, we are data rich, but I think what we look at and how we look at it has historically tended to be driven by sort of national standards, if you like. So our mean number that you refer to, recognise there's a huge range within that, and we've got some absolutely fantastic performance in terms of what that means for patients, but as well as some really long waits, some waits that make us all feel deeply uncomfortable. And I think there's a few lenses to look through that. As you say, there's a patient experience and quality of care first and foremost, and then so what does that mean to us in terms of how we operationally plan and deliver those services. So we set up before Christmas now a bit of a joint working group with our clinical colleagues, our operational colleagues, our BI, so our I can't think of the word, the teams that pull our data together. Informatics is the word I was looking for, that just went from my brain, teams and other stakeholders in the organisation, so our complaints and experience team, just to look through each lens when we look at long delays, not just the data. So what's the data telling us, and then so what underneath. So we've had a number of sessions looking at it across Yorkshire, and now we are breaking that down at what we would call our CBU level. So Bradford District and Craven, Leeds, and Kirklees, Hull, and that side of town, North Yorkshire, etc. So we can really get into that granular data, understanding what the numbers tell us, what the complaints, the patient feedback, what our adverse event documentation tells us around harms and impact, so we can have a real kind of holistic view of, so what does that mean? And that will be come in the form of a bit of a quarterly report through to up through our kind of quality governance processes and up into our quality committee and into board, so we can really understand it in the round. Now, as I've said, we set that up a few months ago, and we're still in the early stages of understanding. We've got our next session, which I do believe is one of the West Yorkshire CBUs, in about 2 weeks' time. So we're building up that body of evidence around how we understand that, and then make some actions around what we'll do to deliver. I think our challenge in the ambulance sector, my background is secondary care, primarily urgent and emergency care. Within urgent emergency care in hospitals, in A&E departments, there's a body of evidence around long delays and what that means for mortality and morbidity. There isn't so much of that in the ambulance sector. So what we're trying to do is build, using all the data that I've just described, both qualitative and quantitative, to understand that, and then we hope in the future to work with our research team to perhaps do that piece of research, but we're not quite there yet. So a lot of work to do and understanding, and we do very much look at that data internally, Councillor Hutchinson, around how do we know, and how do we know if we're safe, how do we know if we're effective, and then if we're not, what's our next step plans through our internal governance processes. So I hope I've explained that. It's quite a detailed piece of work that we're in the middle of.
Yeah. Thank you for that. You refer in the report to a pre-dispatch push model being trialled in Bradford and a call before conveying scheme in mid-Yorkshire. I wondered what exactly those models are and how the trials are going, and whether they're applicable to other areas in West Yorkshire, or whether it's too soon to tell.
Do you want me to come in on that one?
Yeah, I would say, Rachel, yeah, if you can answer that, yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yes, absolutely. So we've, as you correctly say, and I picked out from the paper, what we highlighted there was probably some of our most current kind of work and relationships. So those 2 pilots that or tests of change that we've been implementing are linked back to a national directive around having single points of access. So it comes back to what Nick was saying around how do we support patients essentially to be navigated and referred into the right service to meet their needs. Now, some of that will be within our gift when patients contact us and our call centres. So some of that work is done directly through Julia's teams and the contact centres, where they identify patients with a certain cohort of conditions. And we've got established relationships with services in the community where we can make a direct referral. So if you interpreted Push as a direct referral to that service, they will review the patient's clinical needs and either accept that patient as a patient that they can deal with, or pass the patient back to us, and then we would essentially kind of either clinically review in the call centre or dispatch a paramedic crew to that patient. So that's the Push model, and we have that arrangement right across West Yorkshire. What we've done specifically with Bradford is to enhance that, and that is to work with our specialist paramedics in urgent care. So these patients tend to be, their need is more of an urgent care need rather than an emergency care need. And so we have a team of specialist paramedics that specialise in urgent care. And they've had additional training, education to kind of give them the skill set, scope of practice that allows them to kind of respond to patients with a lower acuity need and a more urgent care need. And so what we've done there is that we've put some additional specialist paramedic urgent care resource in place. And what we've enabled them to do is have a direct conversation with the clinicians in the Bradford place and in their sort of community hub. And what that's allowed them to do and test out is actually have a clinical conversation to say, we've got this patient who's presenting to us, this is what we know about them based on our clinical kind of algorithm that Nick outlined at the beginning. We think they're suitable for you. Are you able to kind of take this referral? And they can have a clinical conversation, whereas previously it was done sort of without that clinical conversation. So that's what we've been testing there. So what we've discovered there is that there's been lots of patients identified and those conversations have taken place. What we've been able to learn from that is where a patient's not suitable clinically for that service. And again, some of that comes by only having the clinical conversation. So what we will be able to do is then kind of take that learning back in and refine our automated procedures and processes so that we can stop kind of sending them kind of patients who they can't deal with, and that just kind of cuts out some of that inefficiency in the process. So far it seems to be working really well. It is very early days. I think we only got it up and running at the beginning of this month, so it's only kind of been operational for a few weeks. Similarly, but quite different in many respects, the Mid Yorkshire one's similar in that we've only kind of had it up and running for a few weeks, but the patient cohort that we jointly kind of identified with Mid Yorks was patients in a care home, and often what we find is that our crews can attend a patient in a care home who they consider not to necessarily need the services of an emergency department, and actually conveying them to an emergency department might not be in their best interest, but they need to have an alternative service that they can refer into. So again, what we've established there is direct contact into a senior clinician at Mid Yorkshire to be able to have that clinical conversation with one of our crew members, paramedic on scene, and a clinician who would likely be receiving that patient in the ED or their assessment unit, and they're able to then hopefully identify alternatives or arrange a different kind of care package for that patient to avoid an unnecessary and an inappropriate, clinically inappropriate kind of conveyance to ED. The numbers have been quite small, which is not surprising because we know that these changes in pathways do take time, because our crews have to learn that and remember that there's a pathway in place that they're able to access. And again, just making, I guess one of the other challenges is that service isn't available 24/7. So again, it's about attending a patient in the opening times that service is available. So very early days, but again, we had some really positive feedback where there was a patient story where we were able to appropriately navigate them through a different care package and avoid that unnecessary clinically inappropriate attendance to ED. So the more we can do of that. But as I say, and Nick mentioned the partnerships, and although we do already kind of a lot of work in this space around trying to direct our patients and refer them into alternative services, those services have to be available in each of the places and available to our crews to refer in. And what we do find is that we do have variation, and sometimes we have gaps. But what we're able to do by kind of working in partnership is identify where those gaps are through our data, and then obviously through the conversations with our partners is how we've been able to kind of identify tests of change like those two that we've just run through. But also, I guess what the paper doesn't illustrate is there are other services that already exist in other places. So we have very effective primary care, it's called a primary care advice line in Leeds, PCAL for short. But our crews have access to that, and that's access to clinicians who are able to support that clinical conversation to say, this is the patient I'm with, this is what they're presenting, this is what I've now been able to kind of identify from the clinical assessment. What's the most appropriate service that you think this patient needs to go to? Because it may not always be ED, as we know, and that's really successful as well. So I wouldn't want you to think that those were the only services, but we just highlighted the ones that are the most contemporary in terms of the current climate, really. So I hope that's helpful.
Thanks for that explanation.
Julia, did you want to briefly come in on this point?
Yes.
Because I have another Councillor Jamil's waiting to come in. Yeah. So Julia.
Thank you so much, and I'll be very, very quick. So a couple of points I was thinking about, Rachel's already updated on. I think just for context around what we would call our push partners, we have well over 100 across the whole of Yorkshire. Some of those are mental health push partners, so we can patient can transfer direct into a mental health pathway or service, as well as physical health, such as frailty services, urgent community response, etc. So the breadth is huge, but as Rachel really well articulated, it is about access into those and the ability for those patients to be transferred into. So I think it's just important sort of breadth of content. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jamil.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report, and I really appreciated the explanation around how the service operates. It's really helpful to hear that at the beginning of the presentation, so thank you for that. I think a majority of my comments and questions have been answered through previous questions and comments. It was mainly around the work around the partnership working, and I just wanted to just pick up a little bit on your 4.4 section, which you talk about the identifying different clinical pathways in different areas, so that you can look at different ways of working with patients rather than sending them to emergency departments. Bradford, you're looking at acute partners to enhance handover process and other initiatives. I just wanted to ask, how does that look like in practice? Who are these acute partners you're working with, and the different specific initiatives you outline in the different areas? How were these identified? Was it because of specific things which were happening in different hospitals and areas and that kind of thing, and what is the long term? How are you going to do all these initiatives in all different areas. Once you've sort of like looked at them in these specific areas, are you going to be looking at doing these same initiatives in sort of Wakefield, Calderdale, Leeds and Bradford all together? How is it all going to work? Just a little bit more information around that, please.
Okay,
Rachel,
thanks.
would you like to answer that?
Yeah.
Perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and thank you. And probably just to kind of sort of reinforce the message to say that we already have a lot of kind of services available to us and to our crews, particularly our crews on scene. If anything, sometimes it's too many for them to kind of then be able to kind of remember which pathway exists and which alternative service exists in each of the places. So there is work ongoing and will continue with kind of purpose really around. And so we already know, and that could be some information that you might want us to share afterwards in terms of some of the services that we do have available. Our paramedic crews kind of work from a system called JR Calc, which is basically our platform whereby we upload all of our clinical pathways. So they have that information available to them when they're kind of assessing the patient needs and which service might be the most appropriate. So there is already a level of provision out there. The areas identified were more the contemporary ones that we're currently working on, but absolutely the intention, and certainly I know from an ICB, don't want to speak for Ian's point of view, but kind of addressing that variation and kind of doing that levelling up so that all of the places have got a similar level of provision is something that the West Yorkshire Community Services Provider Collaborative is keen to address, to make sure that we've got that standard offer right across West Yorkshire. So that's not really within our gift as an ambulance service on our own, but actually we're already a member of that Community Services Provider Collaborative. So we're working really closely with the community services, sharing our data and our information so that we can tell a story around which patients are contacting us and which ones that we believe may benefit from an enhanced community or a community offer. And so the work that we're doing is very much around identifying the need through the data. As Nick said, we're very data rich, but actually being able to play that back to each of our places. And we've already been around all of the places in West Yorkshire and provided a suite of information that tells the story from our perspective to kind of generate that conversation to say, these are the top chief complaints. These are the areas that we think we can work together on to improve our access or our crews' access to those alternative services. And that's something that the collaborative, the Community Services Provider Collaborative, is keen and has already identified as one of its priority work programmes, which we're working really closely with them on. And in fact, I'm the senior responsible officer for that programme of work, which just demonstrates the partnership that we've got with our community partners. The other partners that we work with obviously are our acute hospitals. So we have a similar arrangement and again a provider collaborative of our acute providers, our hospital providers, and again we have a really good interface and arrangement with them because we can't work in isolation and neither can they. So we have a very strong collaborative commitment to understand current provision, using our data to identify where the gaps are, have those conversations, but also share the differences across the places so that we can support the conversations to do some of that levelling up. But essentially, it does boil down to kind of keeping it simple and making that access available and simple to our crews to be able to make the right decision for the patients whilst they're on scene with the patients.
Okay. Nick, did you want to just come in quickly on that?
Yeah, just as Rachel's talking there, I thought probably something I just want to raise and just to highlight is that talk about partnership working. As an organisation about 3 years ago, we took the decision that we would invest in partnership directors of operations, and Rachel is one of 3 across Yorkshire in order to fill that gap that we had between. We weren't as engaged as we should have been as an ambulance service with all the local providers and understanding and really part of the planning processes. Rachel's role is a new role within Yaz. That's really helped to plug that gap. And I think Rachel and Yone, but I think really Rebecca is really positive around how Yaz is now much more engaged and linking in with the wider system and really seen as a system partner, whereas probably we weren't previously.
All right, thank you. Councillor Hutchinson.
Just briefly, Chair, section 4.4 refers to the newly implemented clinical reconfiguration at Calderdale and Kirklees Trust. I hadn't been aware that there was a particularly new reconfiguration there. Can you just say what that reconfiguration is?
And I think it should be Calderdale and Huddersfield as well, don't you? Yeah, go on. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't mind coming in on that one. So what that is referring to, and it probably the way it's been worded possibly is a little bit misleading, but it's the ongoing kind of clinical reconfiguration work that the Calderdale and Huddersfield Trust is working on. Obviously, as you'll be aware, there is the new ED facility at Huddersfield, and there is a master plan that will sort of reconfigure how their services are operated and where they're located. So obviously that we have a major part to play in that, in making sure that our patients are being conveyed to the most appropriate service. So some services are available at Huddersfield, and again this kind of illustrates the point really. So it's about our crews knowing which hospital to convey the patients to make sure that the onward services that they might need will be present, but also that doesn't necessarily prevent a patient from kind of walking into an ED and needing a service that might be at a different site. So again, we work with them to kind of transfer those patients through to the other hospital site where that's appropriate. And obviously, as that configuration continues to evolve and the facilities that they're planning to develop are developed, then obviously there will be, in terms of how we interact with that trust, will be different in the future to what it is now, but we're on that journey with them.
Okay, thank you. As we should declare, Councillor Hutchinson, that we jointly chair the scrutiny into the Calderdale and Huddersfield reconfiguration. I think
we haven't missed anything.
Yeah, we hadn't missed anything. We were just a little bit concerned there that we'd missed something that they'd reconfigured before letting us know. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Right. Okay. Can I ask a question on the 111 service, please? It states that the pattern of demand is not just at weekends and bank holidays, but is actually during a working day as well, when primary care is available. So there's not just the pressures when it's not, but there's also pressures when it is. So is this is the response going to be demand led, or is there going to be a plan for the future in how 111 and primary care interact, so that people have an easy access into the healthcare systems that they require at any point in time, rather than just sort of, it feels a little bit like you're firefighting here. Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah, that's Julie, you can come on to answer this one, but it's a big question, that one, isn't it?
It is Julia? A big question. Thank you so much, Chair. So I think there's a couple of things that are in our gift and a few things that we are still waiting on. So I think there is an NHS England review of 111 that we are expecting. I think that will give us some steer nationally around how 111 services and primary care align and dovetail. I think it's probably fair to say that with the GP or the primary care collective action, there is challenge in some of that dovetailing at the moment, and I think demand changes, rises post-COVID pandemic have really challenged us all. I think to really clearly say exactly what we're doing, I don't think we can at this moment. I think we do need the national steer from NHS England around what the provision for 111 services may need to look like. But there are periods where we do work extremely well in a dovetail way together from a primary and secondary, from a primary care and a 111 perspective, and times where it's not quite where we want it to be, but we do work really closely, or as close as we can, given the current position. But we are contracted and commissioned, you know, as we currently are. So some of it's not necessarily in our gift to immediately change. I think that would probably be my sense. But Nick, could you come in?
No, it was that last point there about being a commissioned service. We are a commissioned service, and Ian and colleagues as well. And that's who we have our arrangements with, and we are going through it. Our current arrangement lasts until next year. So we're currently working with Ian and the team to see how that pans out. And like you say, Julia, the national view will probably feed into what services want to be commissioned for Yorkshire.
Okay, Ian, do you want to come in at all on this? Do you have a plan?
We do have a plan. Yeah, I mean, I guess the other bit of context around this is that we are in the planning guidance and in the 10-year plan. There's going to be a significant focus on integrated neighbourhood healthcare in places, and this is really about moving away from a service that is reactive to when something goes wrong with people to a service that is more proactive in understanding needs and supporting people to stay well, and how you know, urgent care services fit within that work. I think it's going to be an important part of the work that we're doing, and that's work that we're picking up through the West Yorkshire Urgent Care Board that Yaz are well represented on. So yeah, absolutely, that's the intent. I would echo the comments that Nick and others have made, which is that we are working really closely right across the system on this, with the ICB, with acute providers, with community providers. And I think that collaboration will stand us in good stead for the planning round for this year that's coming up.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we could look to bring something back when you've got more plans in, so that we can scrutinise on that, I think, because access into services seems to not be as easy for some, and it needs to be a lot better, doesn't it, access into primary care, because then of the knock-on into secondary and acute care, you know. So okay, right, are there any other questions then? No? Okay. Oh, Rachel, did you want to come in?
Sorry, obviously it's not a question, else I'd be answering it myself. But I think it was just maybe just to highlight just a point that is embedded within section 3.1, which is our mental health response, which I guess it's really just to kind of, I guess, sing the praises of that. I think it's a really positive step that we've taken. It was part of the NHS long-term plan, but I do think that we are one of the first ambulance services to manage to get that dedicated mental health response up and running. So across Yorkshire and Humber, we have a total of 9 dedicated mental health response vehicles. In West Yorkshire, we have 4 of those 9. And we also have a developing workforce around specialist paramedics in mental health. So again, they're paramedics who will then have an enhanced education and portfolio of knowledge and skill set around mental health, but also linking it right back to sort of doing the right thing for the patients. It's allowed us to develop access into mental health services, not just NHS-led mental health services, but some of our third sector partners, whereby we can kind of appropriately refer and support patients with a mental health need, where there isn't a physical health need that needs addressing as well, in a more in a better environment. The vehicles are very different to a traditional ambulance. So again, the whole patient experience is much more, it's a much better outcome and experience for those patients who may well be in a very difficult situation, personally experiencing a mental health crisis. So I just wanted to kind of finish on that positive note and make sure that that had not kind of got hidden in the body of the paper too much. Thank you.
Thank you. And in actual fact, I was going to, you've reminded me as well, I was going to ask a question at 7.3 on the end of life care, because I was interested in the West Yorkshire Fire and Rescue Service and Bradford District partnership. Now, is that across West Yorkshire, or is it just for Bradford?
So I can
the end of life care.
Sorry, I'll jump in on that
one.
Oh,
good, Chris. I asked a question in your area.
That's okay. No, that's work that the Patient Transport Service has been doing with the fire service, specifically in that area. So at the moment, the request came in really from that fire service, and in terms of the sort of district foundation trust as well. It's not huge numbers, as you can see, but that is very much bespoke to that local area, and it's work that we could possibly do and broaden out, because I think it would be better use of collective sort of multi-agency resources, and perhaps, well, not perhaps, definitely more dignified for patients as well at the right times, where it being patient transport crews rather than fire service staff for some of those lifts and moves upstairs to downstairs. And as well, from a timeliness perspective, really seeing some positive feedback with regard to that.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for that. So thank you ever so much for joining us today and giving the information in response to our questions. So we talked about handovers and turnaround time, keeping focus on improvements, streamlining turnaround time, and we had a discussion on Wi-Fi needs and availability. Also, we discussed about data, and you've got more work to do on the data and research area. Partnership working, and we mentioned specific initiatives in Bradford and Mid Yorkshire, and the rollout across West Yorkshire of different initiatives that are being piloted. Also the 111 and primary care systems, and look to bring something back on that. The mental health provision was highlighted, and the end of life care that is being provided in Bradford. Okay, have I missed anything that as a summary? No? Okay, that's great. Thank you ever so much, everybody, for that. And the committee, for those who wish to leave, please do feel free to do so. The committee is now going to move on to item 6, which is the non-emergency patient transport services national eligibility criteria. And I think, Nick, are you staying for this as well? Yeah,
if that's okay. Yeah,
that's absolutely fine. Yes. So Ian, are you leading on this one?
My colleague Simon Rowe is leading on this one, but I'll just say a couple of words first, Councillor Smith. So we've had a couple of conversations on this previously, which was really helpful. But just kind of to remind the committee of the scope of this work and what it aims to achieve. So as was flagged in the YAS paper, the national eligibility criteria for non-emergency patient transport services was developed by NHS England in 2021, and there was an expectation that ICBs would work with ambulance services and other partners to implement those criteria. And those criteria are essentially about ensuring that patient transport services go to people who need them the most. One of the things that the YAS paper didn't say is that we've got quite a steep demand growth in these services in West Yorkshire and across Yorkshire and the Humber. And this work is essentially around ensuring that, that kind of precious resource, if you like, goes to the people who need it the most. So the work that Simon's been doing has been around understanding the impact of these changes on communities and individuals who won't receive the service, and ensuring that there's appropriate mitigation in place to manage the impact of that change. And so that's really it. Have we done the right work to understand the impact, and have we put in place appropriate mitigations for the groups who are affected by the change? But I'll hand over to Simon to quickly introduce his paper.
Okay, Simon.
So the paper comes in 2 parts. The first part around the criteria itself, the local adoption or the proposed local adoption of the national criteria across West Yorkshire. And then the second part, the update from the actions that were agreed from the last time that we came in December 2024. If we just take a step back for a moment, when we've been looking at trying to assess the impact, a logical question is, well, what is the change, and therefore what is the impact? And I think in previous presentations, the 2 previous presentations in both October and December 2024, that at that point in time, that it was considered that there might be several, more than one potential changes between the local criteria that currently exists and the national criteria that has been developed. Within the paper itself, I'm more than happy to talk through the detail and use myself as an example, if I may, Chair, just to try and illustrate the point. Actually, I believe that through conversations with colleagues on the call from the ambulance service and wider stakeholders, that actually we could get this down to an actual one singular change, and we can talk about that in the sense of the role of friends and family in that regard. So building on Ian's point, that when we therefore get it to that singular change as I've described it, so just to illustrate, individuals who have a significant mobility need, they need stretchering, or they need assistance to get in and out of a vehicle, will continue to receive patient transport. Those who require it because of their attendance of renal hemodialysis will continue to get patient transport. The singular change concerns those individuals where there's either a pre-existing medical condition or there's something that they have at hospital that may affect their ability to transport themselves home, and we can go through some examples in that regard. So when we go through that, we actually believe at present that therefore changes the actions that we agreed last time, because the actions that we agreed last time were on the basis that there were potentially several changes between the current local criteria and the adoption of the national criteria. But actually, we think the change is less than what we previously presented to the committee. And therefore, we do feel that there are reasonable proportional mitigations that are currently in place. We recognise that not everything around transportation is where we would like it to be, and we've talked previously about the state of public transport across West Yorkshire, or we've talked about social economic factors across West Yorkshire. And we're not decrying those, but we do believe that with the community transport alternatives we have in place, with the healthcare travel cost scheme, and we've done a lot of work that I can explain the detail on that if members so wish, that we do have reasonable proportionate mitigations in place to be able to directly address the change, the singular change that we're talking about. But that does not negate the need that we need to ensure that transport is an integral part of health service planning. We've talked previously about how hospital appointments can be tailored and timed for individuals' attendance at those appointments. And they are matters that we do want to address in the medium to longer term. But to build on Ian's point, they're not necessarily points that directly concern the change that we're seeking to make, and they're not necessarily therefore we would consider reasonable proportionate mitigations towards that. They're wider issues that we need different approaches to deal with. So if it's okay, Chair, I would wish to stop there in terms of a broad introduction and allow then for conversation on points of detail, please.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. Can I just ask for a minute for questions? Can I just ask about the community transport schemes? This is one of your mitigations, community transport schemes. Are there community transport schemes that cover the whole of the West Yorkshire area? And have you done a piece of work to find out whether they have capacity to take on board extra work from these changes?
So a number of points. So number one, each locality across West Yorkshire has an ICB commissioned community transport alternative. But as we've gone through this piece of work, Chair, we found that transport is a huge matter. And actually, as we've started to look at this, we've found that there are a number of schemes that aren't ICB funded, that are funded either through lottery funding or equivalent grants, that voluntary community sector organisations do operate, and therefore we've been attempting to ensure that we understand those, for example. So to give an example, there is a lottery funded minibus operates from Crossgates in Leeds that transports individuals to and from hospital. So there's been a huge amount of work that's been undertaken, a huge amount of asking lots and lots of people to try and understand what currently exists across West Yorkshire. In terms of the second point, in terms of capacity, I think it might be worthwhile to answer that question to illustrate the singular change that we're talking about between the local criteria and the national criteria. So if I may, Chair, can I just use me as an example, and then we'll take it from there. I'll use two examples. So not that many years ago, I had neurosurgery. I didn't require stretchering home. I didn't require assistance to get in and out of a vehicle, but I had friends and family who could take me home safely. So in that scenario, there's no medical need, because I've got friends and family who can take me home, to make me eligible for patient transport. But if I did actually require to stretchering, or I did require true assistance to get in a car, or I didn't have friends and family who could take me home, that would therefore start a conversation about eligibility for patient transport. The two, it's very important in the paper, the two principles around the review. The principles are to ensure that patient transport is reserved for those who require safe transportation to hospital, which can't be achieved via any other means, and to start promoting more and asking more about the use of independent travel when it's safe to do so. So we wouldn't necessarily be expecting individuals to suddenly jump from being ineligible for patient transport to then moving into community transport for the reasons that I've just said. That might be the case for individuals who've got no level of support whatsoever, but all of those services will always say they've got capacity. We've just commissioned in, or just about to commission in Kirklees, what we colloquially call Bus 3 with the voluntary community sector organisation. So there are growth plans in place in many localities across West Yorkshire, but there's still a piece of work to do to understand actually how much the voluntary community sector through non-NHS funding are supporting people to get to and from hospital. But that might not be because there's a medical need for them to be transported. That might be because it's there and it's convenient, and people are accessing it rather than taking a bus to get themselves to outpatient appointments. The second example I just wanted to illustrate, to build on the point, and it's good that Chris is on the call as well, because we've talked about this before, but there are a significant number of aborted journeys in patient transport, where an individual will go to an outpatient apartment under the current criteria, under patient transport, and then voluntarily make their own way home following that outpatient appointment. So the logic would go, and there's around 3,000 journeys a year that fall into this category. If an individual can find their way home after a hospital appointment, what was the reasoning before that as to why they couldn't find their way to the hospital appointments? And what we're looking at is the importance of safeguarding capacity for those who are most in need for it, those who can't travel safely to hospital. And I suppose we have questioned and worked through how can, in 3,000 cases, individuals find their way to have patient transport to get them to hospital, but then abort the journey and make their own way home after that. So what we're trying to do is safeguard the capacity for those who are most in need. Does that make sense, Chair?
Yes, yes, thank you. Yes, thank you. Although I would hope that as you're looking at those aborted journeys, you're also looking at appointment times and whether somebody can actually physically get to an appointment. They might be able to get home, but can they physically get there? Councillor Hutchinson.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, you're talking about people who where they have a procedure in hospital and then need to get home. An example, my mother had angiography performed, and she was conveyed from following the angiogram back home in an ambulance. And it's just as well she did, because during that trip, she started to pour with blood from the catheter site, large quantities, and had to be blue lighted to the nearest emergency centre. So people who are having, there are risks with outpatient investigations, outpatient procedures. How are those being actually addressed in terms of safe transport home? Because she wouldn't have been safe if she'd been on public transport, or if she'd been particularly if my father had been driving her.
Sure. I suppose the point that I'm seeking to stress is the criteria for the service are medical criteria medical safety. So if there's an issue of medical safety, we want to ensure that this service, as commissioned, is reserved for those in medical need, and for those where that medical need isn't there and they can be safely supported home by friends and family, then that should be the preference, that should be the approach that's taken. So I'll entirely agree, Councillor Hutchinson, with the example that you've given, and we're not suggesting for one moment that individuals with a medical need shouldn't be receiving patient transport. What the National Review found was quite the opposite. It found that there were situations where individuals without a clear medical need were accessing transportation at the expense of people who did have a medical need. What we've therefore done is we've got it down to that one singular point, hopefully as a point of reassurance, to say, if you've got a significant mobility need where you can't safely travel unless it's in patient transport, you will get patient transport. If you are in receipt of renal hemodialysis because of the frequency of appointment, then you will get patient transport, albeit you have the offer of patient transport. If you have a medical need that prevents safe travel via any other means, you will get patient transport. So what we're talking about here are individuals who can be safely transported home with friends and family who may be currently in receipt of patient transport. So I'd like to think that was a reasonable point with a significant reasonable mitigation attached to that. If individuals are going home with friends and family and they're of a low income, they can apply for the healthcare travel cost scheme. We have 40,000 people across West Yorkshire who qualify under the healthcare who access the low income scheme. That is comparable to where it was pre-pandemic. It did dip pre-pandemic, but it's now back to where it was, and we have over 200,000 people who are eligible for healthcare travel cost schemes via other means, whether that's applicable tax credit or applicable benefits. And we are doing a lot of work in that area to understand those numbers. That's taken 5 FOIs to various government agencies and various meetings to get that data. I can assure you this data does not exist in one centralised form, and I want people to really, really understand that there's been a lot of work that we've had to do, preparatory work, to get this right. If it was a simple case of going to a national agency and asking for the numbers, we would have done it. If individuals choose that actually they want to use their community transport alternative because it's nearer to them, they've got good relationships with them, then each locality does have at least one scheme funded by the ICB, and we are working through what voluntary community sector organisations are doing too. But nobody will be left with a situation where they haven't got something. But that's the point that we're trying to get to in terms of fair and proportionate response. But we do recognise, and it is within the paper, that the whole conversation around eligibility criteria has raised the profile of transport and the role of transport in the planning of healthcare services. And there are some factors, whether it's public transport, whether it's social economic factors, whether it's booking of hospital appointments, that we do need to talk about and we do need to resolve. But we want to stress that that isn't directly related and proportional to the task of whether we change the eligibility criteria. That's something we would say is separate, that requires a separate plan, and our engagement with you as a stakeholder early in terms of what we should be considering in that regard. I hope that helps, Councillor Hutchinson.
Chris, did you want to come in on this particular item before I bring Councillor Hutchinson back in?
I can do, and I will be brief. So I think the example you gave is a great example, Councillor Hutchinson. And in terms of that type of patient condition, it would appear there would be some observations required and perhaps some clinical intervention. So that probably wouldn't even have been a patient transport journey. That might have been a low acuity journey with our colleagues from A&E. But I think just in terms of some certainty around that, anything that requires observations or there's a likelihood of deterioration during the actual journey would certainly be fitting into they need safe transport, as Simon's just said.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hutchinson.
Yeah, I did have some questions about the independent right of appeal, which I'm not really clear what you're saying in the report as to who would be providing the independence in the independent right of appeal, if it's where that's needed. There is an example from the parking and traffic regulation outside of London scheme, whereby people who want to appeal against a parking penalty can appeal to an online mechanism where they present their evidence and the council presents its evidence, and that produces a very rapid, very cheap method of resolving those kind of disputes. And I wondered whether there was anything that might be learnt from that.
Yes, definitely. So it comes in two parts, Councillor Hutchinson. So the first part of it, before the independent right of appeal, is with the Yorkshire Ambulance Service to say, okay, have the questions, have the process been followed to get to the decision of ineligibility. In terms of the independent right of appeal, it's exactly as you describe. An individual would present their case as to why they believe they should be eligible for patient transport. And we would be looking to say, well, the ambulance service have said there isn't a medical safety issue here. There are community transport alternatives here. There are the healthcare travel cost scheme application here. What is it that makes you believe that you're eligible? And we recognise there is a situation where people might start to describe the frequency of their treatment or the distance of their treatment in that regard. And so therefore, across Yorkshire and Humber, the three ICBs have come together to create one single independent right of appeal. So you're not going to get a different right of appeal if you live in Pickering as opposed to living in Wakefield or Sheffield, for example. But Councillor Hutchinson, it's exactly as you describe. It will be a simple case of people presenting their case and us presenting our case back. But we're hopeful that actually that things will resolve themselves before any such independent right of appeal.
But who exactly is providing that independent adjudication?
The ICBs, the three ICBs together.
Thanks. Can I just briefly, these town hall engagement sessions that you're organising, how are they being publicised to ensure that they're targeted at the people who are most likely to be affected? And how is attendance going to be maximised, given that these are presumably people with limited mobility in the first place?
I suppose this is, if I work backwards, so one of the main problems we've had with the engagement thus far is because we haven't been exactly clear on who the change affects. We've in essence been engaging with everybody who uses patient transport and therefore potentially creating false findings. Speaking to someone about a change in eligibility who's got significant mobility need, who currently can get patient transport and will continue to get patient transport, speaking to them about potentially not getting patient transport creates a false finding. And that's the problem. Now we've got it to this singular bit. What we want to do is say we want to speak just to those people that it potentially affects, rather than speaking to people who it won't affect. In terms of the actual briefing, the other points that you've raised, I can certainly share what our communication engagement team have developed. I haven't put it as part of the paper, and I wouldn't want to present all of the detail now because I haven't got it all immediately to hand. But if it was okay, as a committee, I could share their brief with you, and therefore you could review it in that regard. But for now, I wanted to stress that point, that we want to focus on the people who this does affect, rather than talking to everybody who it doesn't. And our previous work to the committee has shown examples where people say, well, if I don't have this, I'm really going to struggle. But those examples were individuals with complex wheelchairs, for example. They aren't going to be affected by the change in eligibility. So therefore, to present that as a finding that might therefore create a problem is misleading, because it's a false finding.
Okay. Yeah, I think it would be very helpful if the details of how you're actually going to go about that engagement.
Yeah, sure.
be shared.
I think so, yeah.
Yes,
I think we can do that via email, can't we? Can I just clarify then that the independent right of appeal, it is the commissioners who will be of the service who will be looking at the right of appeal because the provider of the service has said that a person is not suitable for patient transport. So it is the commissioners of the service that will be providing the independent right of appeal. Can you tell me, please, where the independent right of appeal comes in then? If the commissioners and the providers are looking at this, will you have somebody who is independent of the ICB that will be involved as well? Or will it simply be officers or committee from the ICB that will be looking at this right of appeal?
In its current form, it's officers of the ICB. So what we're trying to do, and to be really clear on that, and I don't mean this in any disrespect to Yorkshire Ambulance colleagues, how this will be enacted through the contract will be, this is the principles, this is the approach that we expect you to have in place and to follow. And therefore we'll be monitoring and reviewing that. So is the process in place? Is there adherence to the process? Is there the right monitoring arrangements in place? There's got to be some degree of clear blue water between the the operations of this versus the monitoring from a contract point of view. And I think therefore sometimes with partnership working is great, and we should never stop from that, but it can create this kind of blurring of, or this perception of blurring of roles and responsibilities. It is not my job to look at and to micromanage every single question that the ambulance service may seek to set in terms of its process. It is my job to ensure that they have a process in agreement with what we that is agreed through the ICB. In terms of the ICB's current role, we have many situations at present where we review transport requests, whether that's repatriations or out of area requests. So we already hold one central team that manages all of that. So we're still working that bit through, but at present, Chair, to answer your question directly, it would be officers of the ICB. Now that's not to say therefore that won't change in the future, or what I'm saying to you now won't be that will be what it will be on the 1st of April. But in terms of its current design, that is the thinking at present.
Okay, I just think that people would expect an independent right of appeal to have somebody on there who is independent of the commissioner and the provider, because the provider is enacting the commissioner's contract, and the commissioner is then saying, this is our contract, this is what we will provide. There is nobody in there that provides that voice of independence. However, I'll bring Councillor Nichols in, who's been waiting very patiently.
Councillor
Nichols, yeah.
Councillor Smidge, apologies. Could I just come in on that point briefly as well? I mean, I think it's a helpful point that you've raised, and as Simon says, we can have a look at it. What I would say is there are parallels with this process that exists currently. So, for example, we've got a IFR panel process, individual funding request panel process, which is where individuals believe there's a reason why they should have access to treatment that isn't routinely commissioned, and that has always been run by the commissioning organisation. I think the word independence is kind of interesting in it, and one of the things that we do through the IFR panels is we ensure that we have the right clinical representation within those panels to ensure that there's the right clinical perspective. So there's potentially things that we could look at there to ensure that we've got the right level of kind of it's independence of view, isn't it? And it's diversity of views that we want in that conversation, I suppose. Yes, but it's something we can take away.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Councillor Nichols.
Hi. Apologies if there's any background noises, but I've got some building work going on at the moment. It's just a quick question about bus companies. There's anecdotal evidence, within Wakefield that Arriva, for example, frequently cancel buses, etc. And this is leading to people missing appointments mainly, I suppose, outpatient appointments. I'm just wondering if the NHS is having a dialogue with Arriva over their unreliability.
And it's happening in North Kirklees as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to sound a bit hard on this. Yes, of course we are, in terms of we work in partnership. But the job is to consider patient transport services and the change to criteria as a medical service. Yes, we understand we're providing a health services within society and social and economic points of view. But there's a danger here that we're not going to do anything, because there's situations with franchises with public transport providers that don't fall within the responsibility of the NHS. In the same way that social economic factors don't necessarily fit within the responsibility of the NHS. That might be part of a broader partnership plan that's referenced in the paper, but I do want to stress the difference between what's a fair and proportionate mitigation for a change to the national criteria versus wider societal problems that we currently face, some of which don't actually fall within the direct responsibility of the NHS to fix. We have a part to play in it.
Yeah,
that doesn't mean we are responsible.
I suppose what I'm hoping for is to take pressure off your services.
I mean, if you look at it, and I really do agree on that, the way that we take pressure off our services, if I'm being brutally honest, is to look at these lower acuity patients that have no medical reason to be in transportation, that we can look at our rates of payment to private taxi companies and profile that resource towards those most in need. That's what we need to do at present, because the demand for this service is growing at 7%, 8%, 9% a year, and we have to manage that. We have a responsibility to deal with that and to ensure that all of the cases that, for example, Councillor Hutchinson has mentioned, for example, are treated in the best possible way. But it would be amiss to say that there is 100% appropriate use of a patient transport service against medical need, because that's what the National Review found. That's why the national criteria was subsequently brought forward. And I believe we've identified that there is a singular change that we can work on in a fair and proportionate manner. But yes, I entirely agree. We want to work with people on it, but equally we have to be politely assertive in the sense of what's fair and proportionate in terms of the project that we're looking at, rather than turning a project into potentially trying to cover everything that currently exists across West Yorkshire. And I know that's not what you mean by it, Councillor Nichols, but through conversation with numerous stakeholders, it has very much, I'll be honest, ebbed and flowed between that. And yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so Ian, did you want to come in on this? You're on mute,
it's really difficult stuff, this, isn't it? But I do fully support the point that Simon makes, which is that a patient transport service can't act as the kind of the thing that soaks up, a demand because of a lack of a bus service. Do you know what I mean? That's the wrong way of looking at this problem. We do work really closely with the West Yorkshire Combined Authority. We have done for a while. Simon's engaged with them closely through this work, and we do understand that the pressures on bus services in West Yorkshire, completely understand that pressure. But I think, as I've said, we can't mitigate for things that are completely out of our control, unfortunately.
Okay, so you have one of your actions is about the pilot for prepaid bus tickets, and you've yet to progress that. So just before I bring Councillor Hutchinson in, where are you with that pilot then? You've yet to progress. Are you able to progress, or is it not going anywhere really?
Yeah, so if we just take a step back, just because I want to give the context, if that's okay, Chair, for 10 seconds. So this was on the basis that there might be a situation where cancer patients receiving cancer treatment could be ineligible for patient transport. But for all the reasons we've outlined today around medical safety, that isn't our current position. The West Yorkshire Cancer Alliance and the West Yorkshire Association of Acute Trusts did agree to look at the pilot as you describe it. I'm currently working with both parties to understand actually why those prepaid bus tickets haven't been released and therefore provided to patients. I'm more than happy to provide an update outside of this meeting in writing once I get it, but I'll be honest, at the moment I'm still trying to understand why that is. Equally, I would expect two parties who have agreed autonomously between themselves to run this to work together and to keep each other informed on progress, rather than me going to them and saying, oh, can I have an update because I'm coming to the scrutiny committee and it was agreed in December, to be told, oh, it hasn't started yet. So yes, there's some work to do behind the scenes in terms of understanding that. But yes, you're right to raise it, of course.
Councillor Hutchinson.
Thank you. I mean, I agree that patient transport services can't solve the evils or ills of the whole of society, but changes within the NHS, reconfiguration of services, changes of pathways instigated by the NHS do necessitate patients having to travel further for their treatment in many cases. And so I think it's very important, the point that you make, that there is a need for an overall vision or plan of how transport is part of the planning of healthcare services. And that's very relevant to the last agenda item today, in terms of specialised commissioning. So I would sort of push back somewhat on the the implication that we're trying to solve every issue that society throws on it through this. And I would like to know how you think this committee might support, play a part in the integration of travel considerations with the ways in which services are being delivered by the NHS.
I've got that in one sentence, Councillor Hutchinson, from my point of view, that every time we're seeking to make a change, regardless of what it is, transport should be considered, because no matter how you get there, unless you live in the hospital, you are going to have to transport yourself or be transported there. And I think we can argue it both ways. We can argue it both from the point of the health service, as you've described, Councillor Hutchinson, but equally we can argue it from the point of public transport and changes to franchises and difficulties in franchises, and understanding actually what the impact of the health service is in that regard. And there's a need to just simply raise the profile of transport via whatever means and talk about it. And from our perspective, our part of the jigsaw puzzle, and it's only a part of the jigsaw puzzle, is to ensure those who have no other safe means of getting to and from hospital get that service in the way that they would expect to get that service. And there are examples where that isn't the case, and demand pressures are significant. And I've mentioned earlier, I think looking at areas where the spend that the public sector has on private taxi firms, whether that's from a local authority point of view for educational points of view, or whether that's from an NHS point of view in terms of transporting people to and from health appointments, that to me is a common aim that we should be looking at together and saying, how collectively do we get the best rate of payment for use of private taxi companies? Because whether you're looking at patient transport service and their use of private taxi companies, or you're looking at local authorities, there is a growing spend on private taxi companies. And I would want to understand the causal reasons for that, whether that's public transport issues, as Councillor Nichols has described, or that's something else. But to me, that would be priority number one.
Although that can pale into insignificance when compared with the costs of the treatment, day case operation or whatever, getting patients there in time to actually have the treatment that they need. It's a very small part of the overall cost.
No, I'm not suggesting that we don't pay for it. It's the growth in cost and the variability in cost, and what's actually a fair price to pay in terms of the variation that I've already seen across West Yorkshire, which I know isn't part of my paper, so I won't labour the point, in what different parts of the public sector pay for private taxi companies. I'd want to understand why that variability exists. Of course, I accept all of the points around people need to get to their appointment on time, but I would question why in some parts of West Yorkshire the cost of that is far greater than other parts.
Okay, all right. Does the Yorkshire Ambulance Service, Nick and Chris, do you want to comment on this paper at all, or no?
No further comments, no.
No. Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay. So I think Ian.
Sorry, Councillor Smith, you might be going to say this, so apologies if I've jumped the gun, but we are considering this for the final time at the transformation.
Yes.
So
yes.
I'll let you come in then.
Yeah. I'm just going to round the conversation off, I think, because we are aware that your meeting is on Thursday, and that any recommendations we have from today will be forwarded to you in time for that meeting. So this is what I want to come on to now, is to the recommendations. So first of all, thank you, Simon, for your presentations coming to the committee. We realise you are trying to enact a national criteria across West Yorkshire, and it's that changes to the national criteria that we have been discussing. So thank you very much for coming to our meetings and providing the information. So I've got a few points, but please do feel free to jump in. So I've got the community transport, looking at the capacity within that community transport. There does need to be a further piece of work on that, so that the ICB know what that capacity is across the whole of West Yorkshire. We've talked about risks, etc., and you've said that no one will be left where there is without a service of some description. The right of appeal within the ICB, we talked about having an independent medical voice within those appeal discussions. We understand there are many appeals that you deal with, but maybe that's something that you could look at as a whole as well. The prepaid bus tickets pilot, you're going to let us have an update on that. The communication for your further engagement with users of the service, you're going to let us have that. And we've also said that there needs to be a vision for transport in any discussions about changes to health provision. Have I summarised those points that everybody has made? Have I? Yes. Okay.
Sorry, Chair. Just one point. Sorry to be pedantic. On the first one, when it says capacity community transport, capacity commissioned by the ICB or capacity commissioned via any means.
I think what I'm concerned with is that there is some community transport offer across West Yorkshire, whether that be commissioned or whether it be non-commissioned, so that people do not have to have a great deal of expense if they're affected by this change. There is some alternatives to it. Okay. All right. Yeah. So are we content with the proposed changes, or do we still have some reservations, or what are the committee feeling? Councillor Hutchinson.
I think I've indicated I do still have reservations, particularly in terms of the assessment of risks for patients who are being discharged, whether it's from day case or from inpatient care, to be able to get home, because it does depend partly on what they've had done to them as to what those risks might be.
Yeah, okay. Councillor Nichols. Oh, I'll come back to Councillor Nichols. Councillor Scopes.
No, I think we've had a good debate, and I think we've talked about it as much as we need to, and we should crack on now. I think we've made the concerns that we have clear, and I think that gives the ICB and the service the right guidance to move ahead. But I guess what I wouldn't want to happen is further delay of the implementation. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Nichols.
No, I have nothing more to add.
Okay, and Councillor Jamil. Are you okay?
Sorry. Yes,
okay.
yes, that's fine.
Yeah,
thank you.
okay. All right. Councillor Lee from North Yorkshire, do you have any points you wish to raise? I can't hear, so hopefully no. Okay, all right. So we'll put those comments then in writing for you, Ian. Okay, and get them over to you. I think we are realise that you were moving forward with this. We just have a few issues that we wish to be addressed, and Councillor Hutchinson and myself have a few concerns that we have raised as well. Okay, all right. So is that clear, Ian?
Yes, that's clear. I mean, without wanting to put any pressure on, if we could have that note by tomorrow, that would be super helpful.
Yeah, I'm sure the officers will be looking at that as quickly as possible for you. Okay, all right. Okay, so if anybody wishes to leave now, that is fine. Thank you for being with us this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
We move to the committee will move to item 7, which is the memorandum of understanding. So this is a memorandum of understanding between this committee and the ICB. Which the committee is West Yorkshire plus representation from North Yorkshire. The memorandum of understanding has been to place committees and also to the legal officers in West Yorkshire. There is one change on page 41 of the papers, which is the addition of delivery of specialist services. Consider whether the JOSH can be briefed on a service that delivered in one place but affects patients in the whole or larger part of the West Yorkshire area. Does anybody have anything they wish to raise on the memorandum of understanding? No. Do we agree then that memorandum of understanding? If the committee members can indicate, please. Yes. Yeah. Wakefield okay? Yes, and Kirklees is okay as well. Thank you very much for that. So Ian, now that we've agreed from West Yorkshire JOSC, how will you be taking this through the ICB process, please?
Well, given that it's a memorandum of understanding, which is a kind of almost a partnership agreement for how we want to work together, and given that it reflects a fairly mature way of working, I would say that's developed over the past 7 or 8 years and has been sort of formalised through the creation of the ICB. I don't see this being contentious at all. I will take it to the executive team of the ICB and get support there. I don't think it needs anything more than that. Like I say, colleagues in the ICB are very supportive and comfortable with the working arrangements that we've got here, but just to get it kind of formalised, that's the process that I'll follow.
Okay, thank you very much. If you could let us know then, please, Ian, when they've gone through that process. Yolandi, was there anything that I didn't cover?
No, we covered everything. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay then, so now we move to item 8, which is the delegation of specialist commissioning services to the West Yorkshire Integrated Care Board. This is to give us an outline of the delegation of services from NHS England that is coming in April of this year. Ian, do you want to lead, or is it Esther that's leading? Or
Yes, please, Councillor Smidge. I need to leave in like literally 5 minutes because I'm chairing a meeting at 12 that I need to be ready for, I'm afraid. So what I'll do is I'll just say a couple of words and I'll hand over to Esther Ashman and Hayden Ridsdale, who are leading this work from the ICB. So if I can say a couple of words and then duck out, that would be great. So first thing to say is that there's a national direction of travel to delegate commissioning responsibilities from NHS England to ICBs so that NHS England can focus on its role of system regulator, oversight of performance and those things, and the actual commissioning of services is no longer undertaken by them. As you know, we inherited, there was a delegation of pharmacy, optometry and dental services in April 23. We're expecting specialised services to come in April 25, and then screening and immunisation service we expect will come in April 26. So that's the kind of the sort of direction of travel. On specialised services, it's fair to say that the majority of them will come to the ICB, but not all of them. So we're expecting 84 service lines with a total value of about £460 million. So in the context of the ICB's budget, this will add roughly about 7 or 8% to the total ICB's budget. So delegation is kind of generally a direction of travel that we support because we believe having whole budgets for health services for whole population allows us to better join up services and to improve services. So we're supportive of that direction of travel. What's really important in the process that we're in is that we're doing the right due diligence and setting up the right arrangements to ensure that when we receive the service from April, we can discharge that commissioning function effectively. And so been a huge amount of work that Esther and Hayden have been leading, which is around that delegation process. The conversation we'd like to have with you today is about that process of delegation. So I know you'll want to talk about, you know, the services that are most pressured, the services that we think are going to create risks for us in the future. But we're really keen to focus this conversation on that process of delegation, and then we can have a conversation later into the year when we've actually taken on delegation to talk about priorities and areas for improvement. So that's all I wanted to say. I'll hand over to Esther and Hayden, and if it's okay, I will duck out at this point. Is that all right?
yes, okay. Thank you ever so much.
Thank
Ian.
you very much. Nice to see you all. Take care.
Okay, Esther, is it yourself then?
Yeah, I'll just say a couple of words and then hand over to Hayden. And thanks very much for having the time on the agenda. I think I've met most people, but just in case I haven't, I'm Esther Ashman. I'm the Deputy Director of Strategy and Transformation, working to Ian in the ICB. And specialised commissioning delegation has fallen into our portfolio to manage, and I've been working on that over the last 2 or 3 years actually, because originally we were due to take delegation of the services in April last year, and we chose as a region to delay that because of exactly what Ian's just described, the due diligence, and we wanted to have the time to do that properly and understand what was coming to us and to be able to work through that in the right way. And several other regions followed us with that, and it was the right decision at that time. We've had a lot of hard work over the last sort of year to really get into a good place. We're working really well with NHS England colleagues, but also our other ICB colleagues across the North East Yorkshire region, which puts us in a really good position, I think, once we have got the services, to be able to work collectively together, because not all of them just sit within West Yorkshire. Some of them go beyond the West Yorkshire boundaries into other areas. There's quite a significant patient flow across ICBs and regions in specialised services, so it's really important to have those good relationships. The other thing that's important to note in this is that the staff who currently commission the services will be coming over to the ICBs to continue commissioning those services. They will come over as a hub, as you'll see from the paperwork, and will sit within South Yorkshire ICB. What we are doing is making sure we've got a strong operating model that shows how we'll all work collectively together, and in West Yorkshire in particular, we're looking at the way we can develop our arrangements, our relationships, and how we do some of that work collectively to really maximise some of the whole reason for having delegated services, which is to do, as Ian describes, do that full integrated pathway approach and really try and shift towards the prevention end of that. And we do try and do some of that anyway. Renal is a good area. Councillor Hutchinson, I'm guessing that renal was probably the area you were thinking about with the transport conversation. So we are doing some of that anyway, but this really gives us that really great opportunity to look at shifting some of the health outcomes by looking at the preventative angle. But Hayden, I don't know whether you want to just come in and give a little bit of a précis.
Of course, thanks Esther, and thank you Chair, and hello everyone. I'm Hayden, I'm a Senior Strategy and Transformation Programme Manager in Esther's team and Ian's team, and I probably know most of you, but from a past life of focusing on dentistry. So I've been able to bring that knowledge of a delegated service to this set of delegated services, or to be delegated services too. And I guess what I wanted to do in the main was talk to you about sort of 5 or 6 sort of process bits, give you some assurance and confidence around how we have been managing this. And as Esther said, there was a sort of year delay decision that was taken to show you how we've used that time wisely, essentially. And I guess the first thing I would say just before I get into those is that direction of travel that both Ian and Esther have just spoken about is set out nationally for specialised services in something called the Roadmap for Integrated Specialised Services and Local Systems. And what that does is it states the end point that we would like to get to. And I guess the important thing to say there is we are trying to realise those benefits around pathway integration and planning of services, great focus on prevention, enabling that shift to sort of more out of hospital care and community care where possible. There are also benefits to be retained from the current model of commissioning services in the way that NHS England have, particularly. There's a set of sort of standardised service specifications and clinical policies that we will inherit that have been developed nationally over many years that are a real strength. There has been an improvement over that sort of period of commissioning by NHS England in terms of access to services for patients and making sure that patients that need these highly specialised services can get access to them. And there's a good connectivity with the national policy development process too. And as Esther said, there's a lot of knowledge within the team and sort of organisational memory that will come with that we're keen to retain. And what we can do is start to blend that with the relationships we've got in West Yorkshire with our providers as well. So really bringing those two worlds together. There's sort of 5 or 6 things that I was going to sort of make you aware of, and some of them have been touched upon as to how we've been managing this safe delegation process to ensure that they land within the ICB from the 1st of April of this year. First and foremost is that strong relationship really that we have developed with NHS England, and that's really important in terms of the collaboration that we've built in terms of sort of ensuring that transfer of knowledge and processes that comes with, but also ensuring that we have got that right relationship, as Ian referenced, in terms of NHS England's ongoing role in, of oversight and assurance, really, and making sure that the team can sort of land comfortably within a quite complex set of systems, really. Second thing, and really important, is we've had independent legal advice throughout this process, and that's important for a number of reasons. So first and foremost, it's ensuring that things we're focusing on are the right things and that we're focusing on them in the right level of detail, and the advice that we've had throughout has been sort of challenging but reaffirming on that basis. And the second reason that advice is really important is it ensures that the processes, the arrangements and the documents that we're developing are robust and high quality. And that's exactly the sort of set of documents we'll be taking through our board in March. As Esther's mentioned, the collaboration with other ICBs is really important for 2 reasons. One is that sort of ongoing relationship and the way that services are planned. But the other reason is so we've always shared the work amongst ourselves to make sure that we've got the capacity and the insights we need across 4 integrated care boards to manage this delegation process, and we're confident we've done that pretty well. One of the other things we've done, we set up a board in West Yorkshire to manage the safe delegation, and what that board does is it brings together commissioners from an ICB perspective, but it also brings together providers, and it brings together people who are experts in their professional areas, so finance, quality, governance and other areas, to ensure that we're asking the right questions, we've got the right input, we've got the right level of oversight, and that we're connecting with NHS England colleagues who are currently doing that job in the present arrangements. We've had a really strong dialogue with our board throughout this process in a number of public sessions, having conversations, sending papers to the boards to ensure that the board are briefed and aware and up to date with the right information, but also to ensure that there's the right level of input, oversight and challenge from the board. And we've been working particularly closely with the chairs of our audit committees across the ICBs to ensure that they're aware they've got space to input some challenge into, but also to appraise the work that we're doing. And that's been a really helpful process. And I think they've been ensured throughout that we've responded well and taken account of the right things. And the final thing as part of the process, I suppose, that we've taken a view of throughout is ensuring that, although we are focusing the majority of our attention on safe delegation, safe transition and safe landing, that we don't lose sight of the future planning requirements and the benefits that we can get to, so that we can really hit the ground running from delegation, recognising there'll be a sort of distance to travel there. So hopefully what that gives you in terms of the update and the papers is an understanding of the level of work, the volume of work that we've gotten into, and that alongside the fact that there is continuity of arrangements in terms of the team commissioning and the providers that provide the services, give this committee a level of confidence and information on how we've gone about that. So I'm happy to pause there, Chair, unless Esther, there's anything else that you'd like to add.
Okay, thank you. So we'll open it up for questions then. Can I ask, you've saying that you're going to have a governance system in place by the 1st of April. So do I take it that you have a governance proposal to take to your March board meeting? And do you have the agreement for a joint Yorkshire and Humber decision-making forum with your partner ICBs in place ahead of that 1st of April transfer?
It's a good question, Councillor Smage, and yes, we've got all of those in place. So the board paper that will go in March, which is pretty much ready, will take all of the suite of documents that support delegation and the importance governance behind that. So a delegation agreement, which is what our legal advice has been supporting us with, and we've been working collectively with NHS England and the other ICBs on collaboration agreement, the relevant finance documentation in terms of schemes, of sort of the I can't think of the words at the moment, the organisational scheme of delegation, all of those limits are described in there, but also what will be in there will be the terms of reference for a joint committee across Yorkshire and Humber. And the important bit of that is because that has to be agreed by our ICB board in order to be able to have that in place. What we also have got as part of the terms of reference is describing some of the connectivity over to the joint committee that's been formed for the North East North Cumbria region as well. Because of that flow I described earlier, there will be some very occasional points where we need to have a discussion across a region. And so it's really important that we capture that. Likewise, in South Yorkshire, they have a significant flow over into the East Midlands area. So it's really important that we recognise that. So all of that documentation will go to the March board, and really happy to share once those are published, share that with the committee.
Yes, please. Councillor Hutchinson.
Thank you. In paragraphs 210 and 614, you talk about work still being underway nationally to set out the operating model for retained services. Presumably, those are services that are still going to be commissioned by NHS England. I was wondering what areas those cover, what is being retained by NHS England, and what risks you're seeking to mitigate locally.
So I'll just start off, and Hayden might want to come in on that. I mean, I think that's relating to a previous board paper. A lot of that work has been completed now. We can send you the link which has the list of those services that are retained and those services which are delegated. I think that will be a helpful document for the committee to have. The bit that's really important to us on the retained is twofold. It's firstly that the staff will be actually commissioning both retained and delegated services. So there will be a crossover between the work they do with NHS England and the work they do with ourselves. And that was why it was really important for us to understand that operating model. But the other advantage that brings us is we've developed a process of agreeing some transparency around the retained model as well, and the retained services, so that, excuse me, whilst we won't have any decision-making power over those retained services, what we will have is an understanding of what they're doing with them, the changes they're planning to make, the transformation, so that we can make sure there are some linkages through to the work that we do. So a good example of that, for example, is some of the gender dysphoria services will stay retained with NHS England, but we know there will be an implication on anything that happens with that, with primary care prescribing. So that's a really good positive step, that, you know, being more into that space of working with people who are dealing and commissioning with the retained services is a positive thing for us, I think. But I think we're in a strong position of understanding that model now. Councillor Hutchinson. Hayden, I don't know whether there was anything you want to add on that.
So I agree with all of that. I guess the last thing that I would add is the sort of various agreements that you've already cited that will go to our board for approval on the 18th of March will talk to that relationship between ICBs and NHS England, and will sort of set out what the sort of statutory parts of that are, but what are also the sort of more operating and working parts of that are, which is exactly as described. So that will be almost codified in the agreements that are signed. Councillor Hutchinson.
Okay. In my For many years, I was lead clinician for cancer in Calderville and Huddersfield Trust, and during that time, it was the functioning of there was a skin cancer network across Yorkshire at the time, which provided huge support to services across the area. Made sure that everywhere was working to a high standard. Unfortunately, those were scrapped in the Health and Social Care Act in 2012, which was a tragedy. But networks have re-emerged. You say, I wonder what the rationale was for NHS England retaining the responsibility for clinical networks when other aspects of commissioning are delegated to the ICBs. So what's the rationale for that, and what problems are you seeking to avoid in dealings with clinical networks?
That's a really good question, and one I don't have an answer to be honest, Councillor Hutchinson. I'm not sure what the reasoning behind that was. I don't see it as being a huge problem. I think the fact that we are working differently with NHS England, we're maintaining the relationships we've always had, but actually we're building stronger ones now, gives us the opportunity to work much more closely with those networks. So going back to renal, for example, Hayden and I have been involved with some work across the entire pathway, and that has been led by the renal network, which is helpfully chaired by one of our clinicians in West Yorkshire. And so I think that the important bit is about us, how we engage with those networks going forward, making sure that the work they're doing aligns to the priorities we have. And that's been really helped by this new arrangement in that we are working with NHS England to look at what their transformation plan, their work plan might be for the coming year, and that will then subsequently play out into the networks as well. So it's not that I see that as a negative. I see that as a positive, that we're working in a different space now. The clinical leads in NHS England are staying in NHS England. They're not coming over with a hub, predominantly because of the national work that they do as well. That's where some of the complexities lie, unfortunately. But I do think we are in a strong position in our region with the relationships we've built. I think we, just as ICBs, need to get on the front foot of really working with those networks, connecting our clinicians, making sure that they're aligned to the priorities that we think are important to us in West Yorkshire as well.
May I just ask a question on an unrelated?
Yes, of course.
In paragraph 2.8, you referred to that NHS England has already transferred some commissioning responsibility for mental health, learning disability and autism services into provider collaboratives. On the face of it, this sounds as if providers are planning and commissioning the services they themselves or their partners are providing. What are the governance arrangements, if I've read that correctly? Because that does sound a bit strange.
I think, Hayden, you're probably a bit closer to that one if you want to come in.
Yes, more than happy to. So that's right, Councillor Hutchinson, and I guess that's almost a deliberate attempt that was instigated nationally to start to blur the boundaries between how services are commissioned, how services are provided. I guess the obvious benefit there is that by bringing them closer together, you can make that more integrated, more well sort of thought through in that sense. My understanding of the current way that this works is sort of the money and the responsibilities are delegated to that sort of hosted sort of lead commissioner, lead provider arrangement, and happens for those mental health services that are described. There are then fairly detailed and robust oversight, assurance and reporting mechanisms that exist between that lead host and NHS England at present. A number of the staff that commission services in NHS England focusing on mental health will remain within the sort of regional team as it currently exists. A number of the staff will be part of this hub, so that's an arrangement that will continue largely as it is at present. But there is sort of this sort of internal provider collaborative arrangements of quality, performance oversight, etc., that then report upwards into NHS England.
But the provider collaboratives are not as transparent necessarily as the ICB is.
I'm not sure of exactly what meetings take place and whether they're public forums or private forums, the types of published papers or not. But it exists certainly within the respective sort of host providers and to the NHS England arrangements at present. There's consideration then of how that will link to, for example, the joint committee that Esther's described and the various committees that exist within our ICBs at present as well.
Okay, Councillor Hutchinson. Can I just ask, you've said that there's to be a clear approach to service planning across the Yorkshire and Humber footprint and that your board will need to be sure. This is one of the things that they need to be assured about. Have you got that in place, that ability to service plan across that footprint?
So the two elements of that are the fact that the commissioning team will come over and they will essentially be doing what they've always done and commissioning across the Yorkshire and Humber footprint, but they will just be doing it as a hub in the ICB. So that doesn't change. The bit that changes is how it connects into the ICBs much better than it has before. The other bit to the service planning is in terms of the work plan and what they will focus on for the coming year. And this time we're doing that collectively together. So they'll be looking at what priorities are coming down nationally in terms of their operational planning, what they need to focus on, what the big changes are nationally are being pushed. There'll be the things that they are concerned about and are on their sort of worry list for needing to look at things for next year. And then they're also looking at what the ICBs are concerned about. So we had a conversation about this, for example, at our Specialised Commissioning Programme Board last week, and we'll be working with NHS England to look at that work plan going forward so that it doesn't just identify things that they're concerned about or that nationally are being pushed, but they're actually the things that we really need to look at over the coming year as well. What we have also agreed last week is the programme board that we pulled together to oversee the delegation. We also now see actually that is a really important forum in a sort of slightly evolved way for next year to sort of look at both the transition, but also to start to look at that work plan and make sure that we're making those changes that the roadmap initially was set out to do, to make those opportunities to integrate across pathways better, and to also make, you know, real changes to services to improve health outcomes for people.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have any further questions on this at this moment in time? I think you'll be coming back to us at another day with some more detail. No more questions? No? Okay, so you're going to send us the governance papers when your board papers are available so that we can see those. We talked about clinical networks linkages, and perhaps you could get a little bit more information about that for us as well. The risks and the work plan, the service pressures and the improvement plans for renal services. You're going to be looking at those. I think we would like to understand the risks and the work plan that you've got, please. And the renal services, I think we would be interested to know how those changes are going to be made, and we can then see in practice how this new system for these specialist services will operate, whilst we also look at the proposals for those changes. Okay, so it will give us a practical viewpoint as to how it's going to actually evolve. But your operating model, please, and your work plan, I think we need to understand that. Have I covered the essence of what we talked about? Thank you, Councillor Hutchinson. Thank you. Okay, all right. So thank you for being with us today, and that brings us to the end of our agenda for today. So thank you, everybody, for your attendance, and we will be putting another meeting in the diary as soon as we can to bring matters forward. Okay, thank you. Thank you.